In this video, we are going to show you how dynamic Qemu Auto-Convergence helps kick in and migrate extremely busy VM. Let's prepare the VM for the migration, but we're not yet going to run it. On the source host, we can observe no CPU utilization whatsoever. This is hypervisor. Then this is VM. Also inside the VM at the moment, there is no CPU utilization whatsoever, only 200 megabytes of RAM used. And here we have a stressapptest utility where we'll basically write to 59.5 gigabyte of RAM. It takes some time to build up all the or to start actually consuming all the RAM memory that we defined, almost 60 gigabytes. And you can also observe it back in the stressapptest command until you actually start to see count down in seconds how much what's the left or seconds remaining. Yeah, actually, for that matter, now you can see it will basically go to 100% inside the VM, and on hypervisor level, this we will see later with virt-top. This translates to roughly 75%. Let's start the watch DOM job info command, or basically observing migration job, and let's actually start the migration itself. On KVM level it's not yet started. Okay, now it actually is. We can observe either data or memory section because they are identical. So basically we have here have a couple of interesting parameters. So what I'm showing you here is dirty rate of pages per second. This is calculated based on the previous run. Now this is the first run, so there is no calculations done yet, but below that you can read it says iteration. We are currently running first iteration. Basically this is RAM coping operation. If you actually read about live migration processes, you will see that in the first phase of the live migration of the VM, all RAM memory pages are marked as dirty, even if you use only 200 megabytes by the operating system. Basically, the KVM will mark all 60 gigabytes as dirty, or dirty in the sense that it should be transferred over to the destination host during the live migration process. And after this first iteration, basically all other data moving or copying operations, so from second and onwards, will be phase 2, which basically means that after this phase 1 is done, after initial 60 gigabytes of dirty pages are copied over, okay, it's already there. As you can see, it says iteration number 2, and below or actually above that we see average dirty rate per second based on the calculation of the previous phase and amount of new RAM that's now again actually marked as dirty. Basically all the RAM is actually marked as dirty right now, because in this 20, 30 or maybe even 50 seconds the stressapptest utility is actually stressing RAM, or writing, actually copying inside the RAM copying memory pages, and basically it will mark all RAM as dirty inside this period. So over here it's now running the first phase 2 migration. So after initial copying of all RAM memory pages, now the KVM is basically checking which RAM pages have been changed since previous run, and it will copy only them, but effectively, because we are stressing the VM, it's all memory again. If you observe the virt-top utility over here, we will see that this 24 CPU utilization of 100% inside the VM actually translate to around 75. For some reason it says 77 over here, but roughly to 75%, because we are using 24 out of 32 CPUs, which we can say is roughly 75%. And right now we are already in the third iteration of the RAM copying process, or total second phase 2 iteration. We can see that dirty rate pages per second. Basically goes a bit up and down until until actually the Qemu will decide that it should start throttling the CPU. The way it works with dynamic auto-convergence by default, unless you basically send it different parameters, is that it's doing initial throttling of CPU is around 20% inside the VM. Basically, it's sleeping between CPU cycles, not really executing them, so to speak, on the physical hypervisor CPU. And after every next throttling, let's say iteration, or when it decides to increase the throttling, it will do this by 10% each time. Again, this is default value, so initial throttling is 20%, then each next throttling is around 10%. And basically this is how it goes. If you now observe the memory processed or data processed, doesn't matter, let's say memory processed amount, you will see we already moved 166.7 gigabytes, although the VM is only 60 gigabytes. So you can see the memory is basically being copied over and over again until the VM is throttled enough to actually get less dirty pages between iterations. So from this point onwards, I'm going to try to save some time basically, and this migration is going to continue for another 20 minutes roughly, or a bit less. And just as I mentioned, to save some time, basically if you scroll to 4 minutes 10 seconds, sorry, that was that's already done, but if you scroll to 7 minutes 28 seconds, you will actually see virt-top utility, which is showing now, instead of previously 75%, it will show you 62%, roughly 63% of physical CPU utilization. This is because KVM or Qemu is actually implementing sleep between CPU cycles, so less physical CPU cycles are used. Then at 12 minutes 20 seconds, you will see again virt-top with only 55% of physical CPU utilization. And then we continue at 17 minutes 45 seconds, it's around 47%. And then if you continue 18:54, it goes down to 41%. Then 23 minutes 54 seconds, it goes down to 25%. And basically the last interesting or moment until which you can actually skip this video is 24 minutes 33 seconds. It goes down to 19% at this moment, and then after this the VM will, after a few seconds, it will come to a total of 26th iteration of RAM coping process, which is basically 25th phase 2 live migration iteration. And you can observe that it has actually at that moment copied over 900 gigabytes of memory, although the VM is only 60 gigabytes of RAM in total. And after this the migration will finish, as I said, and we will see that virt command, which is observing migration process, will basically tell you there are no the VM is no more running on this source host. And we will then show you that inside the VM the stressapp utility is still running, it's still hammering all the CPUs to 100% utilization. And then finally, if we actually check the cloud stack GUI, you can see in the notification section that the live migration job has completed successfully. So basically that's it for the live migration. Now please feel free to rewind through the video at the mentioned point, or at least go to around 24:33, where you can start observing the very end of the live migration process. Thank you.